This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're exploring the higher education portion of the budget and what it means for public colleges and universities in New York. And our guest in the studio for that topic is SUNY Chancellor John King. Welcome back to the show, Chancellor.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
So from the perspective of students and their families either considering the SUNY system or already enrolled at one of your campuses, what do you see as some of the major impacts on their lives from the governor's budget proposal?
Probably the biggest impact is maintaining the freeze on tuition. So over the last 3 years, we've been able to keep tuition frozen because of state operating support. And the governor includes that in her executive budget, $54 million, which will allow us to keep tuition frozen at $7,070 a year for our four-year institution. So that's great. The expansion of SUNY Reconnect, free community college for adults 25 to 55, is also a great opportunity for folks. Right now, SUNY Reconnect includes cybersecurity and IT, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, and areas like nursing and green jobs. The governor proposes expanding it to emergency management, logistics, air traffic control, and transportation, as well as allowing folks who already have a degree to come back for a nursing degree. So that's an exciting additional set of opportunities for New Yorkers.
So I want to revisit both of those things that you brought up. So on the first side of things, freezing tuition, there are other costs, though, involved with going to a SUNY school, room and board, books, etc. What's happening on that front? Are we seeing those costs rising in maybe a prohibitive way, or are there steps being taken to keep those costs in line as well?
We try to keep those costs down, but, inflation takes a toll, and so there's no question that room and board and books cost more today than they did 5 or 10 years ago. The state can also help there through support for our larger capital budget. Mm-hmm. That helps us to make sure that there are academic facilities that are top-notch for our students, and then through the Dormitory Authority, the state helps to support our work on modernizing our housing for students.
Well, sticking with the facilities, you talked in your prepared remarks about the maintenance of campus facilities, and the governor is looking at giving you about a 10% increase, bringing you to $595 million annually, but you've identified $10 billion in need. So while it's great to have more money in the context of things, it's a drop in the bucket. So given the landscapes and our fiscal realities, which are no one's showing up with a check for $10 billion tomorrow, is it better to keep triaging with increases that we can afford, or does the SUNY system need to do a broader look at potentially curtailing its physical footprint so you can just chop off some of the demands when it comes to the maintenance?
What we think would be ideal is a 5-year capital plan for SUNY, similar to the 5-year capital plan that the state has for the MTA or the Department of Transportation. That way, the state could commit to a reasonable amount over those 5 years. We think that should be $10 billion. We'd love to see $1 billion this year focused on critical maintenance, and then $460 million on research capital, allowing us to build cutting-edge labs that ensure SUNY's leadership in areas like the semiconductor industry, quantum, biotechnology. The challenge is the state is making trade-offs between lots of important demands, but a couple weeks ago, we had to close academic buildings at SUNY Purchase and have classes online because there wasn't heat. In the fall at Buffalo State, we had a dorm that didn't have hot water, and so students had to shower in a trailer. So these are critical investments that we need the state to make. They're not glamorous. There won't be great ribbon cuttings because pipes got replaced, but they need to happen.
So when you talk about a 5-year capital plan versus the, say, $595 million in the governor's budget, is one borrowing and the other is them handing you cash that they've just got in their pockets? Is that the difference that we're talking about here?
Well, they're all done through borrowing.
Okay,
That's
so what's the reason not to just borrow some more money?
Well, and,
we're all friends here.
And look, this is an investment by the state that has a very high return.
Mm-hmm.
You know, SUNY contributes some $31 billion to the state's economy, whether we're talking about nurses or teachers. SUNY is one of the largest preparers of folks for those fields throughout the state. So it's in the state's interest to make sure that SUNY's buildings are modern.
Mm-hmm. Well, coming back to the SUNY Reconnect program, which covers tuition and other expenses at community colleges for adults in select career paths, you mentioned the governor's looking to expand this to a different set of careers in addition to what was outlined last year. We're talking logistics, air traffic control, and emergency management. Do you have any idea how those pathways were identified? And has SUNY had any sort of input into that list?
Yeah, the governor has worked with SUNY and with the Department of Labor to identify some of the places where there's the greatest need for new employees. Obviously, you know, you could see the need for air traffic controllers just from reading the newspaper these days.
Sure.
So those are all areas where there are good jobs to be had, and this investment will be very helpful. On nursing, we know we're facing a huge nursing shortage, not just in New York State, but nationally. And that's why the governor took the extraordinary step of proposing a change in the eligibility. For the rest of SUNY Reconnect, you have to be a person without a degree. But in nursing, the governor has proposed, even if you have a degree, you can come back and get a nursing degree because we have such a desperate need for nurses.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're talking about the governor's budget proposal and what it means for New York's public higher education system with SUNY Chancellor John King. So I'm old enough to remember when the hot new way of helping people pay for college was the Excelsior Scholarship, launched nearly a decade ago, really targeted towards middle-class families, covering just tuition. Initially, I think $100,000 income threshold, eventually raised to $125,000. Now the big new idea is free coverage for SUNY community colleges. What is the purpose of these different sort of piecemeal approaches to helping people pay for their college experience? Is there a benefit to that versus going back to the drawing board, scrapping every patchwork system that's popped up, and simply coming up with a cheaper alternative?
Look, I think the state has to keep finding ways to create pathways to opportunity for New Yorkers and to serve New York's economy. At the federal level, I continue to hope that there'll be a conversation about a larger federal solution that would say every American should be able to go to college debt-free. And that doesn't mean totally free. You have to work while you're in college, so forth. But it is possible through a federal-state partnership to get to debt-free college for all Americans. We just haven't had the political will to do that. There's a bill in Congress right now on that exact question. There just hasn't been the will to pass it.
But here in Albany, though, you're not necessarily clamoring for the Excelsior Scholarship and every other different funding stream to be consolidated into one sort of uniform way of helping people pay for college.
No, I think that would be too complicated without
Wouldn't that
the
be
federal
easier
government playing a role.
Instead of having different patchwork system at the state level?
Well, it's again, the state has to work within the federal context. For example, the Pell Grant program, the
Sure.
primary federal financial assistance for low-income folks to pursue higher education. The Pell Grant program in 1980 covered 80% of the cost of public higher education. Today it covers about 28%. So the declining purchasing power of the Pell Grant has caused states to have to step up to kind of cover that gap for students. And we really need the federal government to be a part of the solution here.
Well, sticking with that idea of support for students that just isn't cutting it, the Comptroller's Office recently looked at the tuition assistance program and how it compares to the actual cost of tuition and what people are needing to pony up. Does that program needs to be revisited in any significant way? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you'd love to have more money thrown into the program, but do we need to reconfigure how money is awarded there?
Look, I think what the comptroller highlighted mostly focuses on the challenge in private institutions
Sure.
because we've kept our tuition frozen at SUNY, as has CUNY, and so the tap purchasing power hasn't been diminished there. That said, the total cost of attendance, the cost of, as we've discussed, of room and board and books, is well over the cost of tuition. So could the state stand to invest more in helping folks complete their higher education? Of course. But I recognize that we're in an environment where the state's dealing with federal cuts to Medicaid. The state's trying to make an important investment in early childhood. So this may not be the moment for that kind of ambitious increase in state financial aid, but I'd love to see that over time.
One of the things that came up a handful of times during your budget testimony, during questioning from lawmakers, was concerns raised about SUNY's role in authorizing charter schools. Do you have any skin in that game? Do you want to see any changes to that authority? Or as far as you're concerned, is the status quo working?
Look, I'm not personally involved in the charter review process. We have a charter school institute that reports to our board's charter school committee, and that's where that charter school work has happened throughout SUNY's history in enforcement of the charter school law. The SUNY Charter School Institute has been celebrated nationally for the rigor of their review of charter applicants, the rigor that they bring to reviewing the performance of charters, their willingness to shut down charters that aren't delivering academically for students. So there's a lot of good work that has happened in the Charter School Institute over the years. There is this larger question that I think was behind a lot of the discussion in the hearing today about charter school financing, the impact on the sending districts, particularly smaller districts in suburban communities like Long Island or Westchester. Those aren't really Charter School Institute questions. Those are larger legislative questions about how the charter law functions.
So it sounds like you're not necessarily clamoring for any changes at this point, and you're okay with status quo.
No, I think to the extent that folks want to look at the broader charter school funding questions, that's sort of outside of our purview at SUNY.
Well, we've been speaking with SUNY Chancellor John King. Chancellor King, thanks so much for making the time after already being on the hot seat with the legislature.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell and Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.